Right, good morning and welcome back. Um, did everybody see at least that they have access to the video I asked you to watch in lieu of Friday's class? And whether you watched it or not, you still have time. So we started with that last class, with that video class, looking at the virtue of faith. What is the basic definition of faith? Anybody remember? Yeah.
The act of realizing the truth that God has revealed.
Yep, exactly. The act of assenting to the truth that God has revealed. Now, if we ought to recall in looking at all of these theological virtues, to remind ourselves that they are both a gift and that they come from God, and a virtue in that they are something practiced, habituated in the human person. Even though one may receive a gift, if one does not use it, it does not become a virtue. It does not remain a virtue in oneself. Now, of course, the issue or the perspective that often comes up in the conversation and the topic of looking at faith in general is looking at the relationship of faith and reason. What do we normally think of or associate? How maybe do you often define reason? Any takers? How would you define what reason is? Yes?
Why you would do something.
Why you would do something? Yes? Have something to do with it? Absolutely. Other thoughts? You haven't reasoned about reason recently? Certainly. Reason, in the most common sense, can maybe our justification or our rationalization of things. But in talking about reason in a grander scale, reason often refers to the mental faculty that enables a person to recognize truth. Mental faculty that enables a person to recognize truth and to obtain knowledge, to achieve knowledge. What is the term that both of them share in their definitions? The definition we gave for faith, the definition we gave for reason. What's the term that's common to both of them?
Finding truth.
Truth. Exactly. Both when done properly, are concerned, are desiring and pursuing truth. And what is truth? Basic definition, that which is. That's truth. To know that what is, what is not, is not. Both faith and reason are in pursuit of the truth. Now, it often comes up in times like ours that these can seem to be in opposition. That it can seem that one should be superior to the other. And it can go both ways. Some will say faith is above reason, or reason is above faith. Some will say they are diametrically opposed. That they are diametrically opposed and they cannot be reconciled. Yet, the Catholic understanding of not only the virtue of faith, but even the practice and the capacity of the human person to reason, sees that both of them can work together in the pursuit, the obtainment of truth. That it needs to be understood that they should not be seen as ancient enemies, continually fighting against each other, but on the contrary, as it were, two wings to help raise and elevate the human person to the acknowledgement of that truth. I had you, for this class, read a document issued by Pope John Paul II called Fides et Ratio, which is Latin for faith and reason. And talking about the relationship, the interrelationship of these two, as understood and applied within the Catholic faith, the Catholic religion, which can apply in a broader sense to all Christians. What is it that both of these, in pursuing the truth, are trying to reach out and to understand? First, he says, they seek to satisfy or to come to understand better the wonder that the human person has for everything that exists. We want to understand what all of this is. How does it work? What can it be used for? Why does it exist? Why is there anything at all? Talks about these fundamental elements of knowledge spring from the wonder awakened, the contemplation of creation. Both faith and reason do that. And we awake and we see all of this around us. We want to understand what it is or what it is not. That wonder opens us up to the truth, to the pursuit of the truth. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, in writing on metaphysics, that which is beyond the physical world, talks about that all human beings, all men, he says, desire knowledge. All men desire knowledge. And of course, in writing this work of metaphysics, what is beyond, Aristotle is pursuing that ultimate question, the ultimate knowledge behind it all. How can it even exist? And perhaps even starting to answer the question of why. Aristotle is not a Christian. In fact, he exists centuries before even Jesus of Nazareth even exists. And yet, many of his ideas and his understanding resonate with what Christians have understood for centuries. What needs to be seen is how it is both of these can work together. How is it faith and reason can have a working relationship and not be opposites and not be enemies? It starts, as it were, perhaps on a more rational basis. What John Paul II calls an implicit philosophy, which are ideas and principles that are understood and obtained through the use of reason, the rational faculty, that are universally recognized. The basics of things that can be understood. So, for example, the principle of non-contradiction. Anybody know what the principle of non-contradiction is? Everybody's taken their philosophy classes yet? The principle of non-contradiction states A cannot at the same time be not A. A thing cannot both be and not be something at the same time. That is illogical, as Mr. Spock might say. On this basic principle alone, we have the beginnings of truth, that we can say something either is or is not. There is also the ideas of causality. There is something. Every effect has a cause that initiated it. Part of it, as we have seen in much of what we've studied so far in our class, many of the very basics of morality, right? What's perhaps some of the most basic moral principles that are universally held? What might be one of them? No thoughts, no ideas?
Like things like societal things, like not killing people, not hurting people.
Number one, don't kill the innocent, right? Yeah, things like that. Number one, don't kill the innocent. Others you might think of that are kind of universally, not just necessarily our society, but pretty much every human society recognizes as essential and important.
Protect the vulnerable.
Protect the vulnerable. Yes. Others? Yeah. What's that? Yeah, there is something in general true to that. What do you have as well?
Don't steal.
Don't steal. Yeah. Many of these things start from this implicit philosophy that is kind of within the human person. Using their reason, they come to understand these things. Now, of course, within the Catholic framework of all of this, what we would also say is that, and we've seen this a little bit, is that God has imprinted this into not only the fabric of the human person, but even basically into the fabric of creation. And hence, because we are rational creatures, we are able to discern and to understand them. But we say their source comes from the one who is truth himself, which is God. In reflecting on this in the particularly Catholic aspect, in his document Fides Oratio, John Paul II talks about some perspective from, as seen in the Old Testament, of some basic rules or patterns that reason begins to follow in the human person. He talks about how, first of all, human knowledge is what he says is a journey which allows no rest. Human reason is a journey which allows no rest. For reason, rightly shaped, rightly organized, desires, seeks, pursues after truth. It wants to know, and not just merely to know for the sake of knowing, but to know, to understand, and to apprehend the truth. But this journey of reason, this journey is one that cannot be puffed up by pride. Reason cannot function well or at its peak if one is inflated by pride or arrogance. Now, one who goes along this path must not think that everything is the fruit of personal conquest. That is placing oneself at the center of it all, rather than the creation, everything as it exists, outside and distinct from us. It is not we who have manufactured the truth. No, it is we who have humbled ourselves to recognize, to apprehend the truth that is in front of us, before us. It is not there because we have imposed it. It is our eyes, our minds, our hearts who begun to see behind the veil, see the inner works. But lastly, as of course the Old Testament would put it, there cannot be a full pursuit of this in this journey without some sense of the fear of God. And what is meant by this is to have a recognition of the transcendent sovereignty and provident love that exists, that is integrated, written into the governance of the world. What might be, what is perhaps the biggest area or the biggest topic that the debate of faith versus reason comes up, especially perhaps in a kind of university setting?
Science.
In what way? What's usually the scientific topic?
Big Bang Theory.
A little bit more focused than that. Usual debate between creation and evolution, right? Yeah,
Actually, a question about that.
yeah.
We're talking about like the debate between the two. Where does that leave? So like, where does that leave the leaders of Bach that created, or not created, but kind of formulated the Big Bang Theory originally?
Well, this particular debate is different than that. This is so the creation evolution debate is not on the origin of the universe. What you're talking about is kind of the origin of the universe. Just that there are those who want to say, well, science says it came about in this process and that's it, or those who just say, well, it's creation versus evolution is the question of where humanity came from. That is what the creation versus evolution debates are about. How did humanity begin to exist? Since the formulation of Darwin's, at the time, rather interesting and somewhat radical theory of evolution, and applying it on a macro scale, beyond just the shaping of beaks or whatnot, but beginning to apply it on the evolution of the species, major work on it. The debate has emerged in how to understand these two, because there is the evolutionary principle that says we are in some way evolved from some sort of primatial species. The progress, the Neanderthals, Homo africanus, Homo australopithecus, famous skeleton of Lucy, supposedly one of the great ancestors of humanity, nearly 200,000 years ago or something like that. Versus the perspective of creation that adheres strictly and at times perhaps almost too literally to the text of the Bible. In particular to Genesis, the first chapters of Genesis. It says, God formed man out of the dust of the earth, formed woman out of man, and that they began there. That's often where it is seen. Is one of the biggest areas where it is seen, this conflict between faith and reason. Anybody remember that big debate at the Creation Museum between Bill Nye and Ken Ham on both of these perspectives? Bill Nye focused on evolution. Ken Ham, of course, creation. Because what often comes down to is that it seems one of these is emphasized against the other. Either the perspective of faith over reason, or reason over faith. Yet it must be understood that there are and can be different types of truths that are not in opposition, but come from different ways of looking at and apprehending the world around us. Perhaps it's a part of the issue in many of these types of debates. What types of truth? So first and foremost, scientific truths. This is knowledge that can be obtained by experimentation and observation. So the initial experience that we have of our senses, using all of our senses, more often than not, perhaps sight and hearing, but also experimentation, testing things, right? Mixing two things in a jar and see what happens to them, right? It turns a pretty color or it blows up in our face. That depends on how big the explosion is. And if you're unprepared for it too. Next, there are philosophical truths. And I don't want to say this is necessarily a ranking or a hierarchy. This is distinguishing these truths. One is not a greater truth over the other. They're still all true, that which is. The philosophical, though, utilizes some of those scientific, our observation and perhaps our experimentation. But going beyond that, obtaining knowledge, pursuing knowledge through the use of speculation, through the processes of the human intellect. So, for example, understanding and formulating the principle of non-contradiction, the principle of causality. It does not ignore or deny the scientific, but it goes higher, or deeper, we should say, than that. We said before, Aristotle's great work on this is called metaphysics. Meta, kind of beyond or deeper than the physical. Last, in looking at these truths are, of course, religious truths. These may be grounded in the scientific or the philosophical, more often than not in the philosophical. But at the same time, they are in some way revealed. And that's a major part of faith in the Catholic system. Remember our definition. The virtue of faith is the assent given to truths revealed by God. It's not those that we can pursue merely by intellect. Which is the major way that we receive truths in reason. The inner intellect of the human person. Faith receives the truth from the outside source, or that which is truth itself, which is God. These are all truths. But they are truths in a particular form of apprehending it. The scientific, as it were, through the most basic thing of just our sense experience. The philosophical, utilizing some of that, but then utilizing reason, the inner faculty of the human mind, of the human soul, the human person. Then those religious truths that may utilize some aspects of the other two, but ultimately derives itself from that which is revealed. In looking at and understanding this, in the Catholic faith, we see all of these as being united in truth. They are not opposed to each other. John Paul II, writing about it, talks about the unity of truth as a fundamental premise of human reason. The unity of truth is a fundamental premise of human reason. as the principle of non-contradiction makes clear, right? Something cannot be both be and not be. Cannot be both true and false at the same time. Revelation renders this unity certain to show that the God of creation is also the God of salvation history. The same God who creates, the same God who has created humanity with this faculty of reason, is the same God who reveals himself, what he wants us to know. It is the one and same God who establishes and guarantees the intelligibility and reasonableness of the natural order of things. Why are they able to be understood and ordered? Because they come from God, who is truth, who is perfect reason, one to whom all things are ordered and from whom all things have their origin. So no, there cannot be, in truth, an opposition between faith and reason. In fact, they need to work together with each other. In the first place, reason can help purify some of the more mythological or fantastical elements of religion. Even in the times of the Greeks, with all of their myths, with the numerous gods, Zeus and Hera and Athena and Hephaestus, Ares and all of them. Hades, yes. Yeah. With all of them, most of the philosophers began to understand that cannot be the actual case. There cannot actually be multiple gods. If our definition of what a god, a deity is, remains consistent. A being that is not merely more powerful than a human being, but is all powerful, all knowing. The philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle postulated that there must only be one God. There can't be a multitude of gods if understood by reason. They existed before Christianity. Yes, yes. The ancient Jewish faith existed there. But it also works in the reverse way. Not to strip away, but to build up faith as well. In her 2,000 years of existence, the Catholic Church has utilized various ideas and principles and understandings outlined within an understanding of reason to help understand, to help better proclaim the faith in Christ. So many of the ancient church theologians of the first 5 to 7 centuries utilized the basic philosophies as outlined by Plato. In the medieval age, they began to use Plato's student, Aristotle, famously utilized through the great medieval theologian, Thomas Aquinas. Most of what we have been seeing in this class so far came to us in reason along with faith. All of the virtues that we studied so far, the cardinal virtues, we saw them in a natural sense and even in a supernatural sense. This understanding, this framework, comes even from the apostolic times. The Apostle Paul writes in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. He says, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. We as human beings have received this faculty of reason. We are able to use it. Indeed, we do use it, whether rightly or wrongly, well or poorly. But that doesn't mean it is opposed or contrary to faith. Nor does it mean that faith is so beyond or above reason that we just accept what it is and then go from there. Some of these things we must. We talked about that before. The mysteries of faith. Why do we call them mysteries? Because of the way they are, or the way they occur or happen, are not things that can be completely grasped through the faculty of reason. It is not a mystery in the sense we kind of have now, that something to be solved. It is the ancient sense, the Greek word, mysterion. Some of the mysteries of faith include, first of all, what God is. The mystery of the Trinity, right? And we say God is one in substance, and yet three in persons. No, we cannot fully explain how that's possible by human reason alone. We can kind of approach mystery, as it were, of the incarnation. How it is that the second person of the Trinity, the one that is normally identified as the Son, descends to earth, takes on human flesh, and becomes a human person, a complete human person. Not a shell, not lacking in anything that makes him human. These are things that have to be revealed to us. Why? Because reason, like anything we are as human beings, is limited. There is nothing about us as human beings in any capacity, not just rational, but the will, the emotions, or anything. We do not have an infinite ability to do anything. We can understand a lot. We can understand much. But we are finite creatures, right? We have a beginning, we have an end. We have a limit to what is us. Right? All of this space that is occupied by flesh and blood is all that there is of me as as a human person, as an individual, right? All the components that are you are the limits of you in a spatial sense. We can come to many truths about or concerning God through reason. As I said before, those ancient philosophers, their ideas were utilized by Christians throughout the centuries to help understand many of the deeper truths, the deeper magic behind it all. How can God be infinite? How can God be one? How can what it means to understand all of them? But many of these things cannot be apprehended merely by reason alone. The inner workings of God, for example, the Trinity. God reveals it so that we may know. Just as we reveal some of ourselves to those whom we are close to. How much do we truly know about the people around us? That really depends on who it is, right? How close we are to them. If we want to get closer to someone, or we want someone to get closer to us, we reveal more of ourselves. It's a poor analogy because we could find out as much as possible about another person, but there are some things that must be revealed from within. Our wants, our desires, our fears, our hopes. It is more true with God, not only that, but also to aid us, to help us to obtain truth. One of the councils of the church, general and ecumenical councils of the church, Vatican I, that met in 1869, 1870, issued a document called Dei Filius, talking about kind of revelation in some sense, and talks about the relationship of reason and faith. This document says, reason indeed enlightened by faith, when it seeks earnestly, piously, and calmly, attains by a gift from God some and that a very fruitful understanding of mysteries, partly from the analogy of those things which it naturally knows, partly from the relations which the mysteries have to one another and to the last end of man. But reason, the document continues, reason never becomes capable of apprehending mysteries as it does those truths which constitute its proper object. For the divine mysteries, by their own nature, so far transcend the created intelligence that even when delivered by revelation and received by faith, they remain covered with a veil of faith itself, enshrouded in a certain degree of darkness so long as we are pilgrims in this mortal life, not yet with God. Quoting then from Paul, we walk by faith, not by sight.
One question about that quote from Paul.
Yeah.
That was like after he had been like made blind for a week, right?
That was far after that, but yes, And he'd gone through many trials and tribulations up to that point. And even I think in that one, and he complains about it in some of the letters. I don't remember. I've never got my precise memory of what things go where. But in one of them, yes, he rattles off this long list of things that happen and all that. And I believe it's in 2 Corinthians where he says at the end, we walk by faith, not by sight. Why? Because we are not the supreme creatures. We are not the highest of all beings. We can be argued to be far above everything else that we know and see and experience in this universe. It can very well be argued that on various principles. The mysteries of faith reveal to us that we are not the highest, the greatest, the goodest, the best, the most rational one. They reveal to us the one who is, which is God. There are three kinds of mistakes that can be made in the relationship of faith and reason. And they can kind of go one way or the other. The first is skepticism. That in this context says that they are contrary to each other. Or, in another sense, to almost say that faith is irrational. To be skeptical of anything that cannot be grasped, obtained, merely by the faculty of reason alone. So in skepticism, reason is exalted above faith. The next error is the reverse. And it is called fideism. To hold that faith alone is sufficient, or to hold faith so high above reason, even if both seem to be contrary. Even if reason, science, whatever says or reveals something like that. To say that faith alone matters, fideism. Fides is faith in Latin. Lastly, is subjectivism. To reject that truth is objective, something beyond or outside or not limited to myself, to individual humans. To say that these things are only true for me. This can be applied in reason, but more often than not, is usually applied in the sense of faith. Well, yes, I think my faith is true, but that doesn't mean it's true for you. This can also, as we've seen before, be outlined as relativism. It's all relative to just each one of us. Both faith and reason, however, can and must be united in the pursuit, the obtainment of truth. Because they are both based on reality. They are meant to be based on reality. Either the experienced reality, what we experience in utilizing our intellect, or the reality that is revealed to us by the one who is the source the maintainer behind it all. If there is conflict, it is because of one part. Either faulty reason or misunderstanding of faith. It is not the reject, we do not therefore reject one part of them. Faith and reason are meant to work together. And they have, and they continue to, until the end of time. Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? All clear as mud? Revealed to you by the source of truth for this class, which is more cultivating. All right. For Wednesday, then, read up on the next chapter, chapter 12. Begin to look at the inner working of the human person that really affects this relationship and indeed affects all our ability to be moral creatures. That which we understand more through faith, but can't even understand through reason. The problem of sin. So read up on that. We'll begin to dive into that, to look into that on Wednesday. We'll see you then. Be sure you're working on your be sure to work on your assignment. Do it at the end of the week.